Welcome to Inclusion Bites, your sanctuary for bold conversations that spark change. I'm Joanne Lockwood, your guide on this journey of exploration into the heart of inclusion, belonging, and societal transformation. Ever wondered what it truly takes to create a world where everyone not only belongs, but thrives? You're not alone. Join me as we uncover the unseen, challenge the status quo, and share stories that resonate deep within. Ready to dive in? Whether you're sipping your morning coffee or winding down after a long day, let's connect, reflect, and inspire action together. Don't forget, you can be part of the conversation too. Reach out to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk to share your insights or to join me on the show. So adjust your earbuds and settle in. It's time to ignite the spark of inclusion with Inclusion Bites. And today is episode 213 with the title, Cultural Agility in Action. And I have the absolute honor and privilege to welcome Mary Lynn Parnell. Mary Lynn is a leadership development consultant, intercultural trainer, and relocation specialist who helps leaders and organizations build cultural agility, trust, and belonging in a global and diverse environment. When I asked Marilyn to describe her superpower, she said this is her love of people and her ability to bridge worlds across cultures, perspectives, and disciplines with curiosity, empathy, and structure. Hello, Marilyn.
Hi,
Welcome
Joe.
to the show.
Hi, Joe. Sorry, I went ahead. I was excited.
You confessed earlier that you've listened to quite a few of my episodes, and I'm really honored. I'm meeting a listener for the first time.
I have. I really enjoyed them. They're really enlightening for some of them, especially the nuance between what you don't expect to hear, but then when you hear it dive down, and it was just really interesting.
Yeah, I've been surprised by some of my guests. I'm looking forward to being surprised by you. So we were chit-chatting in the green room earlier, and we kind of concluded, well, you led me to believe that you're a child of the world, in not necessarily geographically defined. Tell us a bit about where you were brought up and how that shaped your life.
Well, yeah, awesome. I am a citizen of the world in the sense I'm a classic third culture child, born in one country, raised in another. So I'm American born, so you can hear by my accent a little bit. Really astute listeners will might say, "Oh wait, she's not fully American. She might have something else in her." And that would be Canada. I grew up in Montreal, Quebec, so the only French province out of all of the English-speaking provinces. I spent most of my formative years in Canada and returned to the US when I was an adult at 18. And so my family in and of itself, I'm first generation American. So when you hear about first gen, that's that I'm a very typical, my family's from Haiti. So came up with a very Caribbean background. And that really made life interesting growing up Black American or Haitian American or first gen. Part of the things I love because it just makes life just that more colorful. And moved to Europe when I was, I think back in 2012, made Europe my home. So moved to Spain and have been here ever since.
And you now have a family in Spain, so you're first generation Spanish, I guess.
I moved over with 3 children. So 3 of my children, I'm a mother of 5. So 3 of them were born in the US and the last 2 were born in Spain. So they, interestingly enough, if you ask where they're from, they say they're American because that's the kind of home culture that we have. So they're an American culture kid, but they have learned both languages, Spanish and Catalan. They love all things Europe. They struggle with some things US when we go back. They don't understand some things when they go back. So I have to teach them as we on the go, like, oh, this is why this is. And they don't have lived experience. But yeah, we're a multicultural, multi-continental family.
Maybe you should write a book on understanding American culture because I'm not sure anyone east of America gets it.
No, it's one of the biggest enigmas. I think even some subtle things I get asked questions like, because most American countries, even America, but they experience America through culture, meaning movies, music, headlines, sound bites. What does that look like? And I remember when I would meet people in the first years of living abroad, they're like, well, all you eat are hamburgers, right? No. I met this woman who went on a weekend getaway with friends, and she came back all excited. They went to New York, and she said, Marilyn, you can't believe what I found. I said, what did you find? She said, I found salad. I said, yeah, yes. American food is the most unhealthiest food. Yes, we have an obesity issue. Absolutely. But yes, you can find healthy food. Yes, you can live a pretty healthy life outside of what we see in media. So just the misconceptions of what America is. And people ask me questions. They said the country is so vast. Our history is so diverse. You can't really sum it up in a soundbite and say that this is Americana, because you have first generation people, you have First Nations people, which are the first Americans, like this land, like even appreciating where this land came from in the US, and taking even my favorite holiday, which is Thanksgiving, is one that comes with pain. Like I appreciate what Thanksgiving is for what it is today, but there's an acknowledgement of what Thanksgiving meant to the First Nations people. So there has to be that nuance of that feeling and that understanding of our history, and not see it with rose-colored glasses. I think that's the part that I do try to help people understand, that our history is beautiful, but it's also come with pain, and being able to hold both things in tension and not ignoring one for the sake of the other. I think we went in a different place for that, but just really American culture. Can I write a book on it as a first gener? Maybe, but not. I don't have like history of generations of history with American culture, because I do identify more with Haitian culture, with that idea of we were free and independent. We fought for independence from the French. And so when I moved to America, and this began my journey of just learning and racial reconciliation, that there were certain things that I didn't tie to my history when it came to even oppression and even the racism I felt when I came to the US. I didn't understand it because I came from a mentality of freedom. And so I was living out and experiencing these dynamics that I didn't have any reference for. So I had to learn all of it. I had to learn what did it really mean to be Black in America. I didn't know. I really learned that in my 80s, and really identifying with some of the struggle that I had no idea. Part of this is my naivete that came out of it when Obama won. A white woman, I was having a conversation with a white woman, and she was telling me how important his win was. And as a Black person, as a Black non-American person, like I had to really quantify my context. I saw a man who worked hard, who achieved a position, and she said, wait a minute, but for the country, it's really huge. I said, okay, well, break it down for me, because I didn't have that. I wouldn't call it baggage, but I didn't have that context to see that this was monumental for the US, right? I was like, what's going on? And she said, no, this is, let me give you a little bit of history. And so I went to learning about a lot of what it really meant to be Black in America. What are the different politics that happened, how it shifted from one party to the other. I'm still not into identity politics. I don't associate my name with a party. That will never be me. I think that each party has certain things that are redeemable and that are important for society. So I'm not that typical Black and white perspective type of person, but really appreciated being shared, like, oh no, this was monumental. And now I can see it. And I'm like, oh, right. But I just came from, you work hard. Yes, there are barriers, but I didn't know what those barriers were. And then when I learned what those barriers were, then it helped me get more context, because I'm living out the consequences of this system, but I didn't know the origins of it. And so now I know how to name it, and now I can see it. And now, it's been an interesting journey. And then I bring that, but what it challenged me was to think, wait a minute, there's got to be more than this. How can this look globally? And that really started me on my journey of culture for global perspectives.
So going back to Haiti, when you did you ever live in Haiti before you moved to America? So you were born in America?
Never. Born in America. Haitian
But your
culture,
parents,
but my parents did, yeah.
So is that where your move to Canada and Quebec, being French-speaking, did it have any influence? Do you speak French?
Do speak French, trying to get it back. I haven't used it formally in a lot of years. But my mom is the epitome of an adventurous, independent, I'm going to make a way for myself kind of a person. So she left her family at 18, left them in Haiti, and went to Canada. So she went to Canada. So she started her life there. Then her family slowly emigrated to New York. So everyone else went to the States. She's the only one that went to Canada. And then at some point she reunited with my father, and then they started having us, and we went back to the US. And when I was 8, then we made the final move back to Quebec, back to Montreal. And so that's how she was there. She had a life, and then she went back, and then she brought us kids. I'm the eldest of 2 younger brothers, and the 4 of us made our life in Montreal, Quebec.
Oh, so what did you? So you've got a mix of background and culture. So you've got your Haitian background, your culture, that Caribbean, your parents and grandparents and ancestry. You got the American, you were brought up for most of your life, then you moved to Canada, then back again to the US. What does Spain bring you, or Europe? Because Spain is more than Spain. Spain is now Europe, isn't it? It's a
Yes,
very European
yeah.
culture.
It honestly, it amplifies what my life in Montreal was like. Because I couldn't go back to Canada. That just wasn't in the cards. And I remember when I got to the US, it was 1995, and a part of me was like, when can I get out of here? Like it was, as soon as I got there, I'm going to build my life. I went to college, started building my life. At 18, similar to my mom, I left Canada at 18, went to go find my life in the US. My family lived there, so it's just easy to move with them. And there's something that was missing, and I wasn't fully at home in America. And I really had to come to grips with that. And it took a while for that journey to realizing, I really did. And so when I met my husband, we both had that sentiment. He tried to move to Europe maybe 3 or 4 times prior. He tried to move to Germany. And so we had that affinity for more, for diversity, for something different. And Europe just had the values that were very similar to Canada, that were very opposite from the US. And so from a culture, from a values perspective, America is very individualistic as a whole. A lot of their policies, the way the structure's done, their healthcare, it's very individualistic. Canada is very collective. It's more about the well-being of everyone. And so Europe has those values. And so when we looked about moving abroad, we looked at France, we looked at different places, but we really settled on Spain, specifically in Catalonia, which is where Barcelona is. And it just was a right cultural fit. I feel more at home here than I had in the US, which is crazy to think. It's a whole other language, it's a whole other culture. But what the affinity I have for that worldview of collectivity, of collectivism, thinking of others above yourself, and even seeing that played out is something that I really do treasure. And even though it does have some of its challenges, and we can get into that a little bit later when it comes to culture and opening their borders and things like that, Europe was just the next right move for us in the kind of life I wanted for myself and the environment I wanted also for my children.
So when you're moving around, you've had experience of uprooting and settling down again. What's the biggest challenge in that process? In your bio, we talked about belonging, we talked about cultural agility. You have to learn that. It's not something that you just have, is it? Or maybe it is. Maybe you evolve it.
I think I do some workshops on third culture kids to help new arrivals with their children that are doing also new identity like this culture. But for me, I've always said the only constant in life is change. And with that comes this idea of resilience. And so third culture kids, people who tend to move the globe, have this resilience to be able to adapt rather quickly. And what I also believe is that I do a lot of culture work. So working with North Americans moving into European contexts, and some of them struggle with new environments. Some excel, some take a little longer, but it's being able to see and have a perspective of if this is difficult, or for example, some of the government work that you have to deal with, there's inherent stress, but there's a perspective to say, well, this happens in every country. So this country isn't that worse because it's harder. That perspective of it's a challenge. The challenge is challenging. Okay, let's move on. Let's figure it out and let's move on. And it doesn't impact you as much. And so there's a lot of stress and work that has to be done in that perspective. But for me, I found it rather easy. I found it rather, trying to think of the right word, it just was easy. And I say easy, but it's still challenging. I still had to learn. I still had to maneuver. Still had to learn the language. I still had to understand the context that I'm working in, understand a lot of the hidden messages. I really had to become a student of what was happening. But to me, those things were exciting because that comes from a perspective of curiosity. I wanted to know. I wanted to learn. I didn't want to feel like I'm inherently an outsider, which I am, but I'm an outsider that's wanting to belong and wanting to learn. And so when you find yourself in that posture, it just becomes an adventure. It's, yeah, I smile and I think, oh, this is amazing. Many people who have went from different cultures suffer from, we don't suffer, it's not the word, but we go through this journey of culture shock. And the beginning is a honeymoon phase, and then you kind of go down into depression until you get to acceptance. But I think I've always stayed in the honeymoon phase because I really just love the diversity, the learning, the challenge, and the growth. I really enjoy all of it.
I think you summed it up there. You have to want to join in. You can self-segregate. You can say your primary identity, I'm American, I'm Canadian, I'm Haitian. I'm going to keep that identity as my primary badge on my chest and tell everybody I meet. Or I can say, actually, I'm Spanish, I'm European with a Haitian, American, Canadian background. I've got a bit of blend of everything. And it's allowing yourself to become or evolve into more and bring in your current environment into your identity as well, isn't it?
But yeah, I wouldn't go so much with this idea of assimilation, but I think it's more of this evolution of being able to grow and become more of who you are. Some of my clients that I do consultation with when they come into a new city and they ask the questions, they have this big fear. They're like, well, do I have to leave my identity at the door and all the things that I love, all my culture? And I said, no, you bring that with you, but you're open to new things. And then you become a better, more inclusive version of yourself because you're involving everything. And do you have to adopt everything of the new culture? No. Do you have to let go of everything of your old culture? No. But you find a way to have this new culture. And so when we think about third culture children, specifically my children, I look at them and they don't know how to answer the question, who are you? Where are you from? But they're creating their whole new worldview based on their experience, where they've come from. It's very unique to them. And they have to get to a point where they're comfortable with the fact that it's not easily defined, nor you cannot put it in a box. And so becoming comfortable and sure of yourself in that identity is what helps you move forward. And so that idea of putting in a box is something my daughter, she's 19 now, she cannot. She refuses to answer the race questions on an American form. She said, Mom, this is ridiculous. Why are they asking me what my race is? That doesn't matter. Because she's biracial. My spouse is white. And so for her, she's like, but I'm both. And I said, honey, we were in America at that time. So she was filling out a form. And she said, why are they asking me this question? I said, this country is based on race. It's always part of the form. That's it. Answer whatever you want. So she's like, well, I'm going to pick both. I said, you have every right to pick both. So she picked both. But she just was, she was visibly upset. Why are you asking me that? Because in Spain, there are no forms that has a race designation. They only ask factual questions. Where was your mother born? Where were you born? What's your address? Right? Just very factual questions that you can trace, not this race question.
Construct.
Which is it's intangible. It's not even a tangible thing anymore. That's not our world.
Ethnicity is tangible. Race is a construct, isn't it? So
yes, absolutely. Can I say my mom is from Haiti? Absolutely. She's born, her passport says Las Caobas, Haiti, with a Canadian passport as her nationality. That's factual.
Yeah,
it doesn't say, and Haiti, if you see my family, we are the whole spectrum. You have white with blue eyes and really dark with brown eyes. It's multi colored, if you call it that. That's the Haitian history, and most people assume it's just one. It's not black. It's our background is very diverse in that sense.
What surprised you about European, particularly I suppose Spanish culture, rather, because Spanish is a microcosm of the general European culture?
I'd say it's not so much a surprise, but it was an affirmation of what my experience in Canada was. And so I'll bring it back to a different question and then I'll see if it answers what you're saying. When people ask me, what's your experience in America versus Canada? And I would paint them a picture. I said, we can be in Canada in a room. We'll have five Caucasian-looking people in a room in Canada. And the conversations will be, where are you from? And they will say, well, I'm from Poland, I'm Italian, I'm Irish, I'm Greek, I'm fill in the blank. That's where the conversation will be. Take the same 5 people, put them in a room in the United States, and their response, they won't even have a question because they'll see that they all look alike. And that's where the conversation starts. We're all white. So in Europe, it's very much about culture. They don't go a little step deeper, which I really appreciate. It's about culture. It's about your background. It's more, it's deeper, it's richer. Yes, are there challenges? Absolutely. But that just comes out of not knowing. We can solve that with curiosity. That's part of what I do in cultural agility with my clients. How can we be more curious and be more inclusive in our interactions with people and ethnicities that we don't know? How do we affront the things that we don't know? And that's with curiosity as opposed to being defensive and saying, I want nothing to do with that. And so I find that in Europe, because it's so culturally rich in that perspective, that they really deal on a deeper level with difference as opposed to this surface. I'd say surface level because that's my personal belief, but it's not so binary. It's not so black and white. It's not ones and zeros. It's perplex. It's the nuances that are there. That's what I appreciate most about being in Europe.
How can you walk the tightrope between cultural curiosity and invasive questioning?
That's such a great question. The tightrope is there. You hold it. It's like a tension rod. You have to hold it with both hands and really follow the person and where they are and engage and try to get to that second question. It's what I call looking between the surface, is really getting to that second question, really asking, what are they really wanting to know? Where is the nature of their curiosity coming from? And I do give people more benefit of the doubt in the sense that if they don't know, they don't really know what they're asking just yet. So I tend to have a lot more leeway, a lot more grace, a lot more understanding, and kind of going along. And so when I'm at a basketball game, which this has happened, and I usually wear braids, so my afro is not always out. But then when I have my afro out and then they're like, can we touch it? Can we? And so I'm like, okay, this would not happen in the US. I wouldn't let this happen in the US. But I have a little bit more grace in European settings, especially if I'm like their first Black friend, right? Which is very common. And so they'll touch and they're like, wow, this is a lot softer than I thought. I imagined it'd be coarse. And then they would engage with questions. And so I wouldn't let them touch my children's hair. So just in case people are asking. But when it comes to me, I can handle that a little bit better. But have a lot more patience because they don't have that proximity that most cosmopolitan places in the US would have, where they would be able to get it. Spain in general has a very short history with immigration. So they only opened their doors in 1980. And so the influx of having others come in, you say others, but anyone outside of being Spanish. And so their cultural experience, is growing. Not to give it an excuse, but just to be able to say, okay, I have a little bit more patience in order to walk with people a little bit more to answer some of those questions.
I suppose Spain is the holiday destination of Europe for a lot of people, isn't it? It's certainly people from Germany, the UK, and other countries where we don't have that warmer climate. So I guess Spain has been a destination for a while. But I suppose it is. Spain was a very different country before the 1980s. It was the Franco government. It was a very dictator. I think it was probably the word.
Yes.
And it's not that long ago, is it? We think of Spain. Yeah,
this is how it's always been. It does. And then even, so growing up in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, so Quebec and Canada as a whole have their tension between one French province versus everywhere else is English. So there's a language and culture war. Quebec wanting to separate and doing a referendum for many, many years. I remember when I was younger. And so even in Spain, they have that same dynamic with Catalonia being its own, with its own language, its own culture in comparison to Spain as a whole. So those are themes and things that I definitely identify with. It's a minority culture in that sense. And how do you fight for culture? How do you fight to be seen? How do you fight to preserve what you have in light of the majority? And so it is a country that has so much richness in its history and in their fight for I would call it their fight for not individuality, but because the culture, the collective of that culture, but their fight for their language, their fight for their culture. And there's four, if you know, there's four languages in main languages in Spain. And so Spanish is one of them, but you have Catalan, Catalonia, you have Gallec in the Galicia region. And so even amongst that, there's such a diversity within their own country.
Are they more than dialects? They are separate languages, are they?
They are separate languages. And so when people say, well, Catalan is just a dialect of Spanish, I beg to differ because there are some people who speak Spanish that don't speak Catalan or even have an understanding. Catalan actually dates all the way back to Occitan, to like if you look at the history of it. And when it comes to even the closeness. So I do, because I love culture and languages, this is kind of just a nerd fact, but you have French and Catalan have more in common percentage-wise than Catalan and Spanish does. And then Portuguese also has more connection with Catalan and in Italian as well. And so you look at the Romance languages and you see how their relationship to each other is, and then you can tell that it is quite distinct. I often use the difference between English from England versus English from America. And it's English, yes, but I can go to the UK and not understand a thing. There's certain expressions, there's words that they use. And even I had to learn English from England to pass my driver's exam in Spain, because that's the English they use. And I had to learn the boot. And there was a complete phrase that I knew nothing about. And so learning that differences between language, even though you have a lot of commonality, the difference is huge.
And also, I think one of the challenges is a lot of language evolves around similes and metaphors and cultural references, television programs, politics, whatever it may be. So people talk in this shortcut code that if you don't understand, it becomes kind of, you think, what's that about? You know, if you're a millennial, you were brought up watching Friends on TV, so you understand about Monica and Chandler and Rachel and Phoebe, and you understand about the culture there and some of the conversations around that. I grew up in an era where, if you've ever heard of it, Monty Python and some of the sitcoms of the 70s, and me and my friends will talk about Monty Python sketches, and sometimes even growing up, some of the children's TV programs I grew up with. If I talk about some things with my children or other people who are younger, they look at me as if I'm on a different planet, and they talk, and I go, I've got no idea what you're talking about either. So even within a culture, there's these layers and rings, if you like, of growth and development that you've got to cross those cultural borders between your generations as well.
Absolutely. I remember my daughter came home one day. She's such a sponge when she learned language when we first arrived. We arrived when she was 6. She said, Mom, I understand the words, but I don't know why it's funny. When she was talking about jokes, she's like, I understand all the words, what they mean, but I don't know why it's funny. So even humor, understanding why something is funny and getting beyond those layers. And Catalan has a lot of idioms and expressions. I mean, thousands. And I'm like, wow, every day I learn something new, which I love. But getting beneath in that culture of why they think, where did references come from? And references, those types of things come through our history, through our culture. And even our children learning English idioms when one day it was raining really hard and I said, it's raining cats and dogs. And my kids look outside looking for actual cats and dogs, right? So this is something they didn't grow up with, right? These sayings. And so then I remember one time we were walking so much one day and I said, oh, my dogs are barking and they're looking for a dog. And I said, no, it means my feet. And my feet hurt really bad. And they looked at me, and then when they started adopting those, they're like, Mom, my dogs are barking, right? Like, because they knew, they finally got this cultural in, and they're, your eyes light up and then you're able to understand. And so that layer of understanding, I'm a Gen Xer and I feel like people forget about us. And so I'm like, even the references I make, we're like the forgotten generation, I feel like, and understanding that there's certain things that we've seen all the evolution of how music is listened to. And then we're going back to vinyls. Like we've had, I remember the 8-track tape. I remember the vinyls. I remember then it went to CDs. I remember, trying to put my cassette tape in the radio to record music and, kind of all the things that we used to do with music, and now streaming. And then now going back to the stores and seeing vinyls again has been really interesting, even interacting with just music.
I don't know if you're a fan of sci-fi, but there's an episode of Star Trek Next Generation, I don't know if you've ever come across it, called The Mock. they speak in metaphors and cultural references, and Picard's universal translator can't translate these references. Demok and Jalad Tanangra, those sort of phrases, they don't translate unless you understand the symbolic gesture of these two people fighting together to overcome something. You haven't got that reference and those cultural points. So I thought that's a very infamous Star Trek episode that shows the challenge of these cross-cultural understandings, and you can actually misunderstand if you don't understand the nuance, that cultural reference and cultural structure, if you like. So these idioms, these metaphors, all around the culture. And if we go back in time of our human history, we grew up sitting around a fire telling each other stories. And Iceland, if you've ever been to Iceland, they have these thing called sagas, which is handed down over time. So you've got all these famous saga tellers who used to recount around the hot tub or around the culture there, where they're passing these histories down to their generations. And if you haven't been part of that, you just don't understand those cultural references. And again, wars, things break down, miscommunication. And that could be the biggest challenge you face, as you were saying, these little idioms that you pick up every day.
Yeah, I think you've unpacked so much in what you just said, and it's making me think on the corporate level what that looks like when we're forgetting legacy. We're no longer learning how to pass down knowledge between one generation to the other, to the new workers. The cultural behaviors that we're looking at and the nuances about how to respond or how to behave or what am I looking at, and it really, really highlights the part that we really need to be learners all the time, looking at things, how to interact. What does this mean? Being able to have a cultural insider to be able to help you, right? And to be with the culture, to say, hey, I heard this thing. What does that look like? And be curious about what's happening and not give you the message of, I don't understand what's happening. I'm never going to be a part. That is a human response. Most people will stop there. Some will say, I really don't know what this is, but I want to know and I want to know more. I may not know this one, but I'll learn something else, and continuing along the journey. But that part of being able to translate it, and there's some challenges and downsides, I would probably say, that we lose a lot because we don't go back to recuperate some of those things and those concepts and history and stories that we need to. And I see that in my children. So there's certain things that I need to do better on. But what does it look like to continue to keep it part of the conversation, to watch history things, to expose yourself to how things were done in the past? In the cultural work that I do, there's this cultural spectrum or dimension when it talks about innovation. Innovators are always forward thinking, right? We talk about forward thinking, but there's a part that talks about tradition, and I'm more of the tradition where I do look to the past to help identify our present, to help us move forward. Part of my makeup is to always think, well, what did we do? Where did we come from? How did we do this in order to understand where we are today, in order to then move forward? And then other innovators disregard the past completely and are just moving forward, and they tend to always repeat the past, right? Because you hadn't looked back to see what we've done. And so helping people understand that we're all on this spectrum, and all parts of it's important to be able to move things forward. And when we talk about cultural behaviors as well, that's really important. What have we done? How have we done in the past? Some are really good at acknowledging their past, and then so they don't repeat the same things. Some are really poor at acknowledging their past and are doomed to repeat it over and over. And then some are actively looking to incorporate the past in order to reshape their future.
And there's some classic, going back to some filmography here, there's some classic films, Groundhog Day is a classic example of having to go around the cycle and repeat the mistakes of the past to eventually learn how to break out of the loop. There's also lots of classic Star Trek episodes where they get stuck in time loops as well. But so you always have to find that way of breaking out of the mistakes of the past and making slow incremental gains that take you somewhere different.
It does. People, I think we get stuck we look at the idea of change or culture change. It's so monumental. I don't think we'll ever do it. And we may not see it in our lifetime because changing culture is like changing. It's a slow, long game, and people want it fast, easy, and tomorrow, and that's not going to happen. But what does it look like to make those small things to be able to make tomorrow that much easier, that much more agile? I think that's the word. Like, we're a little bit more aware, a little bit more sensitive, a lot more kinder. And these are small steps that we make in that direction.
And also recognizing that not everyone's on the same page, in the same boat, speaking the same language with the same references. So it's all very well in your head. You're saying, well, fast, easy, and tomorrow. People are still on 4 months ago. They're still, hang on a minute, where are we? And it's learning how to communicate your ideas, your thoughts, your direction in a way that is understandable by every different personality type in the team as well, isn't it? That's the challenge.
Absolutely. I think that what I love to help people understand, and this is when I'm like, hey, let's talk more about this a little, because you have a room of people that come from so many different backgrounds, not just from their ethnicity to but for where they're from, their worldview. And you can communicate a vision that really speaks to you. You're like, this is amazing. And everyone's on board. And you communicate this vision and you're all excited about it. You have your PowerPoint charts, and you only reach 33% of the room because you haven't acknowledged for the other 2/3 of the worldviews that are presented, and you haven't communicated and answered the questions that they need. And so the worldviews, they're summarized into three. One is innocence and guilt, power and fear, and honor and shame. And so people who come from an honor and a shame worldview or paradigm, their internal question is to ask, is this going to bring us honor? And your pitch could be, this is the right thing to do. We are going down the right path. So you're answering that innocence and guilt paradigm, which really sees the world between right and wrong. And so if you come from a right and wrong perspective that speaks to you, then everyone who's on the same wavelength with you, everyone from that same worldview is already on board. But the honor shame are struggling because they don't see how is this, you see it's right and wrong, but is this really bringing us honor or is this bringing us shame? Where are we in that question? Because that's their internal question. And then the other one is power and fear. And their internal question is, are we empowered or are we disempowering someone in this process? What does that look like? And so understanding how we shape our messages that will reach globally, culturally amongst the masses, a lot easier than just the little. I think we struggle with the idea that if we reach an average amount of people, then we've reached everyone. And I come from the other perspective. If we've reached the least of these, then we've reached everyone, because we'll get everyone in that conversation. And really understanding or taking stock with how we communicate is not just for those who are in our echo chamber, because we tend to only surround ourselves with people who think like us, act like us, right? That are in our wavelength. But then we find ourselves in these multicultural settings where there are many that don't have that same perspective. They don't come from things from that same worldview, and they struggle to get on board with your vision because you're not communicating it in a way that they understand. And it's not that your vision is wrong. It just needs to be communicated in a way that answers those basic internal questions for people to really come on board.
As you're talking there, mine was wandering off into something I came across the other week, which was Bain and Company, their elements of a value pyramid, which is based a bit on Maslow, hierarchy of needs. And what it's doing is it's trying to break down what allows people to value your products and services. And you could turn that around from products and services to your internal brand. What do people see in you, in the service you give them as a leader, as a team player, whatever it may be? So how do you align with the values and the needs of the people you're interacting with? So I often think that you have to sort of really try and understand your room, your audience, your environment, and what people are looking for. And sometimes you need to be adaptive. And that's not being two-faced. It's not being inauthentic. It's recognizing that people want to see a different part of you depending on their needs. And often what we do is we communicate from ourselves without understanding how people want to receive that information. And as a multicultural person yourself, you recognize that you can't have one face, one voice. You have to go, actually, this or this or this.
Absolutely. I think it takes you a while to get there because you want to be you. I want to be authentically me. I want to show up on how I am. But that when we think about the art of communication, it's not to be heard or to be seen. It's to understand. And even more than that, it's to understand the other person and what they need to understand from what you're trying to communicate. And so to that end, you don't change who you are and you're not really changing your message. What you're changing is how this message is being communicated. So do you need to be a little bit less quippy, and they'll highlight points that really, really attract those charismatic people that just want the highlights? Or do you need to come in with a little bit more principles? It's also also goes back to a book I really like, which is from Erin Meyer, that just talks about the 8 dimensions of culture. And one of the about even with when you're selling something, for example, some really only want to see, how does it work? Just give me the punchline. Does it work? But others really need to know, no, why does this work? I need the principles, not the application. So it's principles versus application. I don't just want to know this works and it'll save my life. Lose weight in 10 days. Oh yeah, I'm sold. No. How does this work? Here's my research behind it. Here's the stats. Here all the details that I need to know to make sure that it works. And when we come in from one aspect, we've lost those who want to know the why and not just the how. And even with direct and indirect communication, same. Do they want to know a little bit more story? Do they want more high context or low context? How do we need to maneuver in order for my message? How do I need to maneuver so that my message comes through for everyone? And it's a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. You have to ask many more questions of yourself. You have to pass your things through many different eyes to be able to say, who are we missing, and how am I missing it, and how can I make sure that I'm answering those important questions? And so what I love is that with the cultural agility piece, there's like a litmus test that kind of helps guide you in that, being able to ask some of those fundamental questions that people are asking, but not being afraid to do the work and not seeing it as I'm making less of myself because I have to change in order for you to understand me, but flipping it and saying, I'm giving a gift to be able to package it in a way that you can interact with it, because ultimately you are the one who's important in this conversation. You are the one I'm trying to speak with, interact with. So I'm giving the importance of this to you and not to me. I'm releasing that power, that need for my recognition, because that's not, at the end of the day, that's not the point. It's the receiver. The receiver is the one that's important. And what do I need to do in order to honor that receiver in my communication and in my interactions so that they feel what? Not only seen, because we all have the deep need to be seen, but understood. Wow, they understand a bit about me to be able to structure this in a way that I can understand and engage with, and to be given space to be able to say, wow, I can interact, I can engage, I can wrestle with whatever this is, because they've made space for me. And then what happens? They want to participate, they want to engage, and then we have this interaction that's just so intangible that you think, wow, this is what a truly inclusive environment looks like, when everyone feels like they can play.
I sniggered at one point when you were talking there, because what flashed in my head is I'm the kind of person that wants people to have a skip intro button on their forehead. They start talking and they're sort of going, just tell me, skip intro. Just tell me what I need to know. Then I can process that. Then I can ask you a question to clarify what it is. But some people go into this huge, great prologue. It's like, okay, tell me when you get to the bit that allows me to make a decision on whether it's as interesting or not. I almost need this live TLDR filter. Sort of like just talking to my chat GPT for 30 seconds. Tell it everything you know, and then I'll TLDR that, and then we can go, right, now I get what you want. Now I can ask questions. So that's me. But when I talk back, I'm very conscious about the fact that I need to talk in a multitude of ways. One is the TLDR, this is what you need to know, and the why. And some of it is the story. And I learned from somebody that the important thing to do is you don't start on the story before you explain why the story is important. Because sometimes what we do is we start telling the story, you get halfway through it, and then you start to introduce the facts. But I've already turned off. I don't know why I'm listening to the story. So it's always, when you've got this cadence of knowledge and training and things, always start with you need to know this because, and here's some key stats. And now let me tell you a story about that, because I've already locked it in. And it's learning those techniques from an L&D perspective or a cultural intelligence perspective, whatever it may be, so that when you do talk, you really are trying to tick as many boxes as you can.
You can't. We have to adjust everything in the sense that you have people who are auditory, so they really like to hear everything. You have those who tune out; they only want to hear key points, and so you have your PowerPoint to be able to do the highlights. And so we can't get everyone, but you want to try to get as many as you can to be able to say, okay, here's the information. But it really boils down to knowing your people, knowing your audience, knowing what they need, and adapting your message to be able to answer to them. And even sometimes having something extra. So for example, I used to lead a group of 50 individuals across 3 countries in Europe, and everyone had a different communication style. And I have a very specific communication style, very brief. If it's email, it's very short. short. If it's text, it's even shorter. That was me. And then I had this woman, she was older than me, and she said, okay, we had our meeting. I was, speaking with everyone to get to know them. And she was very clear. She said, Marilyn, if I send any communication, I just need feedback that you've received it. You can tell me when you'll answer it, but I just need an acknowledgement. That is my one requirement. And I had to say, okay. So for this particular person, every time I had to make a mental note, acknowledgement is very important to her, even though the email that was sent is informational and it didn't require any response from me. But for her, she needed a response. And so going forward, and that was just knowing this was a communication style that really led towards intimacy. It established me as her leader, and she really appreciated that. And then I was able to do that going forward. But then I also know how to, if I'm in a high pressure situation and I'm leading a group of people, we're putting on an event or meeting or whatnot. And I'll say from the beginning, I said, okay, this is who I will be for the next 48 hours. And I will be very short, to the point, because I'm focused on this. I love you all, helping them frame what they're about to experience, because certain environments demand certain ways of me showing up. And I'm understanding that I know that, but not everyone around me. So helping them also in the process of knowing what they're going to experience. And then after that, getting back to my normal. So I'll say a blanket apology. If I'm short with you, it's not personal. It's because of this. And I just need information for the next 48 hours, very quick, so we can get moving, because I have no idea what the next 48 hours will bring, and I need to be sharp. And it has made a world of a difference, being able to help people understand that in different environments, this is what you're going to experience and this is why. And many have come back saying, thank you so much for that, because we always think you're mad at us. I'm like, no, I'm not mad. I'm just focused. That's how we're going to move forward.
I introduced, I call it the coffee chart. In every office, on the back of the door where the cups are, there's John likes tea, one sugar, coffee black, or whatever. You always have your little choices on the back of the door. So when you're making a round of coffee, you know what people are having. I encourage leaders, teams to produce their communication chart so that I know my style is I like to be contacted in the morning. I prefer text or WhatsApp, not email. If you're going to send me, so you almost like map it all out. So when you join a new team, when you join a new project, you've got new people coming in, you just reaffirm how you work best together. And that allows everyone to go, okay, so yeah, you like that. So you're more like me. Without, you don't want to do these DISC profiles or these Myers-Briggs or personality profile. You just say, how can you communicate effectively with me? And then everyone listens to each other and go, okay, so I recognize that I'm like this, you're like that. Okay, when we talk, I'm going to press the skip intro button because you're going to drive me crazy otherwise, or you're going to know that you need to sort of halfway house it with me, a bit less intro, and get to the point first. And we can work on it together. I think that really is a good way of building a strong team across cultures as well.
You hit it right on the nail on the head, because often we go to these trainings and we get the ideas, which I think our trainings are great, but it's how do you put this in practice? What practical steps can you then bring together these themes, these theories, these concepts? And that's a great example of saying this is how we are. And team buildings are often, or teams are often challenging in the sense that if they're a new team and they're starting all together, they'll do that. What I find that breaks teams down is when they start to transform by bringing a new person on and they skip out on that onboarding for that person. Now you have to go, in essence, you have a new team. You have a new person, you have a new team. So how can we continue to have effective teams? Go back to the beginning with this new person and start over. Do that whole conversation of how do we communicate best together? And then that person feels like they are really onboarded well, right? They feel seen. And then they're able to have this opportunity, that legacy, that history, those sagas, the thing that they haven't had, because you have to start somewhere. Most teams struggle for getting to that normalizing and then performing because they don't go back to that brainstorming phase where they are learning how to work together again. And those are culturally inclined. Here's how you understand my culture. Here's how you understand if I'm a person from a different worldview, brainstorming won't work with me. I need to have permission to be able to participate. So those are the things that should be talked about every time a new person comes, or even when a new person leaves, because that person also has an effect. Really marking those transitions in the life of the team in a way that you can work on making those teachings that we learn practical.
Yes, indeed. You're right. Any change to the team, is you have to make the bonds between the links. What can happen very quickly if you're not careful is you end up having these parallel conversations, these hidden conversations, these little cliques, these groups in a group, and the communication breaks down where sometimes everyone's talking about somebody behind their back or behind the leader or behind the project. And it's trying to, how do we get people to sort of, well, I suppose it's psychological safety, isn't it? What we're trying to do here is create psychological safety so people know they can speak up and go, actually, I need to be heard. And we go, okay, we need to create time for you to be heard. The challenge of safety needs to be there, and we can really, really get into it. And the learner, all aspects of psychological safety, because that's what often breaks down, and people don't know they have permission until you give permission.
Absolutely. And then if you come from a worldview that needs that permission, and they won't step outside. And then from the leader's perspective, they think this person isn't participating. This person, who is this person? I don't know anything about who they are, what they think. They're just lazy. There's a lot of value assignment. They're lazy, or they're non-conformative, or they're not performative, or they're not really adding value. You have to go back with, wait a second, have I given them the space to have I given them the permission that they may or may not need? If they come from, I would say if they come from an American background, which is more innocence and guilt, they don't really need permission. They just think their voice is important already and they'll share. But other cultures are not the same way. They respect authority. They respect order. Innately, that's how they show up. And they have to learn that this is our team culture, that your voice is welcome, that you can share, and establishing those norms from the beginning, but taking the time to do that and recognizing when you have what we would call in a performative or performance evaluation, non-performers, ask the question, why are they not performing? Is it something that we have done that has inhibited their performance? And that comes back to the culture talk. Have we created an environment that they can actually show up? And if we haven't, what are the changes we need to do in order to do that?
I'm definitely a lurker on a new team. So I'm the person that'll sit around the table, listen to everybody, absorbing, learning, becoming competent and confident in what's going on, the dynamics. And it might take me about 3 or 4 team meetings, 3 or 4 weeks, a month, and I'll maybe chuck in a couple of things and say, some contribution here, bit contribution there, see how it lands, then build the confidence. And then once I've got my feet on the table, you won't be able to stop me. I'm kind of full in. Whereas I've noticed that in teams that I've been on, other people join and they're full on, as you said, the American model. I'm going to go straight in here. I'm going to talk without listening. My voice is important. And I sit back and think, hang on a minute. If you'd have just listened and absorbed first, what you've said has been brilliant. However, then everyone has to park everything. Right, okay, we'll put everything down for you. We'll explain why we're doing it. And they go, oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So if you just listen to the end of the meeting, you might go, okay, all that's been covered now. Or actually read the minutes or read the notes or read the project plan. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the part when I work with North Americans, when you come into a global environment, I said, your number one job is to listen. Do not say anything very quickly. Take time to listen, because culturally you may not think that this has an impact, but you come in with this bravado, for lack of a better word, that isn't welcomed. But you just have to stop and listen. And then how other cultures respond to that is they're like, oh, wow, they have this perspective that Western culture is really important. So they'll acquiesce to everything. And that might not work because you're speaking from a totally different culture. It happens in mergers and acquisitions, which I also help with that idea of culture. They don't think about what that culture looks like when you're merging these two companies together, these two different ways of working together, and taking that time to stop, listen, and assess the culture to be able to know what to go in and not to come in and make these drastic changes immediately, because then you'll find that doesn't work or it doesn't translate. So, for example, my favorite story when it comes to mergers and acquisitions is when Coca-Cola, which was trying to get into Peru. And so in Peru, I traveled to Peru, they have this soda called Inca Cola. It's very sweet. It's very good. Coca-Cola was trying to introduce Coke into that marketplace, and it didn't take. One was buying Coca-Cola, and they're like, what's going on? We have Coca-Cola. It's the best. Well, the Inca Cola from the Peru, that's what they liked. So what did they do? They bought Inca Cola. And so they just bought it, and to be able to have market share, but to understand you're bringing something into a market that's not. You have to do the research first. You would have done the research. You've stopped. You've listened. You've seen what's happening. And then you'll see what's acceptable, what's not, what's successful, what will work, what won't work. How do we go forward?
In UK banking, there was a big merger, probably 20 years ago. And we'll just call it one company or one bank was a kind of green logo and one bank had a kind of light blue logo. And I had a friend who came from the green side. And he was telling me about even after 5 or 6 years, they were still green people and blue people. And generally the green people had the senior positions because they were the buyer or they were the senior partner in the whole thing. And the blue ideas were kind of assimilated and but there was still this us and them, even 5, 6, 10 years later. The IT systems, the way things were working, the language was all aimed to be green, but the blue people were never brought on board. And then the two companies demerged probably 10 years ago back to blue and green, and they're both thriving independently again. So it's a lot of effort to actually bring those two cultures together. And if you're not careful, that's your fault line. That's where the fault lies. And you're never going to resolve that unless you proactively manage it.
Absolutely. And that's done from the beginning. When you talk about mergers and acquisitions, I do corporate training as well. So I do mergers and acquisitions, and you do the due diligence. You're looking at each other's numbers. You're looking at the market share. You're looking if it's horizontal or what's the purpose, what's our why in this merger. But the part that gets left behind is the culture. What will be our new identity? How do we get people on board that it's no longer us and them? It is now we. It is a collective. We are all together. We are all one. And you work it on branding. We've got our new logos. We've got our new things. But if we haven't met the underlying layers of that identity of who are we, because now we are a new we are now, what color does blue and yellow make green? So we'll do it. We're now green. We're no longer blue. We're no longer yellow. We're now green. But working on that from the beginning, before you even sign that letter of intent, before you understand, are these cultures that can be merged together? And if not, then we really don't want to do a merger. Maybe we might just want to do an acquisition and have two people work. Asking those questions at the beginning so that you don't go 10 years down the line and then have to divorce in the end.
Yeah. And it's been absolutely fascinating chatting to you for an hour. We could carry on. We were talking for half an hour before we went live. We could carry on. And if I was in Spain right now, actually off to Amsterdam or to Netherlands.
I'm off to Amsterdam tomorrow for a week and then back in Spain in the weekend. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, next time I'm in the north of Spain, the Catalonia region up there somewhere. And I'll look you up and we'll pop in, but absolutely fascinating. So how can people get hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Mary Lynn Parnell, as opposed to Marilyn, as you've heard for now. I have a website. I mostly interact on LinkedIn. And I do have a website as well, which is marylynnparnell.com. More than welcome to get any inquiries, questions if you want to continue the conversation about culture. What does that look like? If you're ready to look beyond, what does that look like to navigate complexity across cultures and borders? I'm the person to talk to. I love it. Love to challenge leaders to lead well and to lead holistically. And that means the full spectrum of leadership, not just management, but really getting to know your people. So if you're looking for cookie cutter leadership frameworks, that's not me. I'm really on the ground, really looking at the truth of what's really holding your leaders back, what's really holding you back into creating these environments where everybody thrives. And so I would welcome the opportunity to talk with you.
So just in case you're reading the transcript, so Mary Lynn, Mary space Lynn, and then Parnell, Parnell, or pronounce Marilyn.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the whole story. So if you're curious, ask Marilyn about why her name is spelt one way and also what her grandma used to call her. So that's even more different. And what people tend to call her when they get her name wrong. She's been everything from Marilyn to Mary Lou. So yeah.
I have even Marlin once and I raised my hand.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
As we bring this conversation to a close, I want to express my deepest gratitude to you, our listener, for lending your ear and heart to the cause of inclusion. If today's discussion struck a chord, consider subscribing to Inclusion Bites and become part of our ever-growing community, driving real change. Share this journey with friends, family, and colleagues. Let's amplify the voices that matter. Got thoughts, stories, or a vision to share? I'm all ears. Reach out to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk and let's make your voice heard. Until next time, this is Joanne Lockwood, signing off with a promise to return with more enriching narratives that challenge inspire, and unite us all. Here's to fostering a more inclusive world, one episode at a time. Catch you on the next bite.